So yeah, I believe everyone remember this little poem, which he is Welsh, from Wales, Western United Kingdom. Like, I hope you have a chance to read this, and I hope you have a chance to think about that. And I hope you are not too busy with your lectures, with your house, with your family, with your financial issues and everything. So have a look. I mean, it is nice, it is nice. This little poem, I like it. So have a look and think about that. Why and does it really matter? Okay, let's move on. And we were talking about central nervous system. It takes us about 2 days for the central nervous system. Central nervous system is brain and spinal cord. And anything other than brain and spinal cord is under peripheral nervous system. So the brain, from the brain, the nervous structures extend out to the face, head and neck, and we call them cranial nerves, nerves coming out from the cranium. And from the spinal cord, all the peripheral nerves come out. And we know that at each and every spinal level, we have a pair of spinal nerves coming out from the spinal cord. In cervical, we only have 7 cervical vertebrae, and we have 8 cervical spinal nerve pairs, 8 pairs of cervical spinal nerves. So they are coming out like that to the right and left at every different spinal level. And if they come out, we call them spinal nerve. And let's say if these spinal nerves merge together, divide together, and they stretch out down to the tip of the toe or tip of the finger. And these are what we call peripheral nerves. So these are the little nomenclature like brain, spinal cord, and spinal nerve. Spinal nerve mean they might march together or they might just stretch on their own. And if they march together and if they divide and split, and then finally it come along all the way down along the limb, this is what we call the peripheral nerves. Peripheral nerves, like for example, like radial nerve, ulnar nerve, median nerve. So these are the final results of the spinal nerve roots, which march and divide and march and divide, and finally they become on their own. So at some point, you might be part of the team to look after this sort of injury. Like you might be the lead surgeon, you might be the main scrub nurse, or you might be like, with the X-ray machine and trying to show everyone. So yes, you are going to be part of the team to look after this sort of injury. And if this is a guy, who I think is in South Africa, like being motorcycle accident, being hit and ran, and then just happening everything, and then finally came to the hospital with this injury. And what do we do? Like usually, for a limb to survive, let's say for this foot and the ankle is open, very much open, and you can see deep inside the ankle, and you can see the skin has been ripped off already. And for the toes, for the foot to survive, we need oxygen, isn't it? Oxygen means we need blood supply. So and there will be a lot of debris, like dirty debris around the wound, open wound. This patient can easily die from infection. So the first thing first, our job is to debride this wound and just try to stabilize it. Only after then we will think, what is the final verdict and where do we lead? So when we are debriding this sort of wound, what we need to do is we need to explore the arteries, we need to explore the veins, we need to explore the nerve, And like about 10, 15 years ago, the usual way of thinking is if someone cannot feed the soul of their soul, plantar surface of their food, it is equivalent to amputation. At that time, they were thinking like, hey, if someone has an insensate feet, then he won't be able to know whether he's standing or his feet is burning, and therefore it is useless and just amputate it. That was, on top of that, there could be a risk of infection, and therefore, just amputate it. But this ideology has gradually changed, and now, we want to preserve the limb as much as we can, even if it is insensate, even if there is no sensation in the toes or in the feet. This limb is going to provide something to stand on. Like it might be much better than like a prosthetic limb. So we want to preserve it. So so the arteries, the status of arteries, nerves, they all, and tendon, of course, you can see the big tendon here. All these become important, and our role is to try to explore these structures and preserve as much as we can and reconstruct it. So, this is the peripheral nerve, isn't it? Coming from the sacrum along the sciatic nerve, and then finally divide into common peroneal or common fibula and the tibia nerve. So these common peroneal and tibia nerve will supply the foot and ankle. So this tibia nerve, common peroneal nerve, which is the division of the sciatic nerve, it is also the final result of the lumbar and sacral nerve roots combined together. So that is the sacral nerve. And I hope you remember this diagram, like brain and spinal cord is the central nervous system. Anything other than that is peripheral nervous system. Peripheral nervous system can be divided into sensory and motor. Sensory means touch or the sensation, input or the input comes into the peripheral nervous system, and the brain might go to the brain, might go to the spinal cord, and we will respond appropriately through the motor system. So sensory going in to the central nervous system is called afferent, and the coming back from the main brain and spinal cord is called the motor efferent system. Yes, sensory can be further divided into sensory coming from the somatic body, like skin, bone, joints. So that is somatic sensory. And sensory coming from the visceral organs, like stomach, intestine, urinary bladder. So this is the visceral sensory fibers under the sensation. And of course, if we have somatic sensory and visceral sensory, we should have somatic motor and visceral motor. Somatic motor is for something like which we do voluntarily. For example, like skeletal muscle, we move our skeletal muscles voluntarily. And the autonomic nervous system, that is the visceral motor system, which is for the stomach, which is for the heart, which is for the urinary bladder. And this autonomic nervous system is further divided into sympathetic and parasympathetic. So we will not be talking about the autonomic system yet, but we will be talking about the peripheral nervous system in general, which will include sensory and motor. So peripheral nervous system, we have sensory or afferent, A-F-F-E-R-E-N-T, afferent, and motor coming out from the central nervous system back towards the organ, which is what we call the motor. And Yes, motor is easy to remember. Motor, we go to somatic body, which is voluntary, or motor, we go for the movement of the visceral organ like heart, lungs, gastrointestinal tract, urinary bladder, reproductive system. They are all under visceral motor movement. But for the sensation, it is a little bit uh, complex to remember. Sensory will be divided into somatic sensory or visceral sensory. Visceral sensory means coming from the visceral organs, and somatic will come from the skin, body, limb, And these sensory, either visceral or somatic, can be further divided into general somatic sensory and special somatic sensory, general visceral sensory, and special visceral sensory. So that is this is a very important slide, I have to say, not for the exam, not for the Nazi, I would say just for your, like for your career, that's the way we divide the peripheral nervous system, mainly into sensory and motor, and then sensory will be somatic sensory, visceral sensory, motor will be somatic motor, visceral motor. But sensation is slightly different. So either somatic or visceral, we have general and special sensation. So what is the difference between general and special sensation? General sensation is like touch temperature. You know that touch temperature, pain pressure, proprioception, and vibration. So these are the general somatic sensation. General visceral sensation is like anything coming from the stomach, intestine. Like you eat a lot, your stomach gets stretched, and this stretching sensation will come to the brain, and the brain will interpret as, oh, my tummy is full, I should not eat anymore, or nausea, or hunger, or anything like that is very much vague, coming from the visceral organ. We have special sensation for the somatic and special sensation for the visceral. As we remember, like hearing and vision, these two are under the somatic special, and taste and smell, like taste and smell is for the visceral sensory. So somatic motor is easy, skeletal muscle, voluntary muscle, and visceral motor is all the visceral organs in our body, which is visceral motor is also called autonomic nervous system. So autonomic nervous system is the motor system for the visceral organs. So yeah, so how do we get the sensation? So yes, for the somatic sensation, as we know, we have general and special hearing and equilibrium. So these their receptors are confined to one particular spot. Like for the vision, like receptor for the vision, they only exist in the eye, nowhere else. For the hearing, the receptors for the hearing, they only exist in the ear. But something like general, touch temperature, pain pressure, proprioception, and vibration. So all these sensations, like they are widely spread out in our body. Like we have a touch sensation receptors in the tip of our finger. We have touch sensation receptor on the face, touch sensation receptor on the tummy and in the toe. So the touch receptors are widely spread throughout our body. The same thing like temperature, pressure, pain, proprioception. So these receptors are widely spread out. So what about the visceral sensory? Visceral sensory, again, like we divide into general visceral and special visceral. Special visceral is easy to remember, taste and smell. So these taste receptors are only present in the mouth. The smell receptor, so receptor for the smell, olfactory, They are only present in the nose. So we do not have smell receptor in the eye or in the skin. So it is very localized and very organized present. So that's why we call them special sensation from the visceral organ. Like for example, for the opposite, like general visceral, like stomach stretch pain. Stretch pain can come from the stomach. Stretch pain can come from the colon. Stretch pain can come from the urinary bladder. So they are all widespread and present everywhere in the body. So a few little terminologies we have to remember. Like receptor, like I was talking about receptor. I believe everyone know what a receptor is. Receptor is something to pick up the external or internal stimuli. So it is like a reception. Like anyone come into the building, we have to go to the meeting at reception first. And that's the same thing, like every time we touch our body, like that will be sensed by the receptors, which is called the sensory receptors. So sensory receptors, we pick up sensation. So external temperature change, these sensory receptor for temperature change, we pick up. If we touch somebody, the touch receptor, we pick up the sensation being touched. So these are what we call receptors. So these receptors means like a reception in the building. They will pick up anything come to the building, and they will pick up any stimuli. And these stimuli will be conducted, will be carried to the spinal cord, or might be up to the brain along the nerve, like a peripheral nerve, which could be like a sciatic nerve, which could be like median nerve, ulnar nerve, median nerve. So all these nerves will take the sensory receptor stimuli coming to the sensory receptor. They will pick up and they will go along the nerve to go to the central nervous system, which could be like spinal cord or the brain. And what is a nerve? I believe we have seen what a nerve is. A nerve is a group of axons, isn't it? You remember that, like neuron and the axon. So axon is covered with the myelin sheath. Myelin sheath back covered with another layer, what we call endoneurium. So now we got one structure. Multiple endoneurium covered axon will be packed with the perineurium. Multiple perineurium packed axons will be packed in a epineurium, which is the nerve fiber. So this is the nerve fiber. And what is a ganglion? Ganglion is a group of neurons. So a neuron, like which is like a jellyfish, that group of neuron is called ganglia. And motor endings mean like if the nerve axon will go along, if the neurons will continue along the axon and then end and act on the organ, on the muscle, on the heart, and that is the junction is called the motor ending, which is the ending, terminal ending of the neuron coming along the axon, and then axon terminal, it is called motor ending. So I hope it is not too much, which is something we have already know. So this is sensory receptor, nerve fibers, ganglia, and motor ending. So it is good to know these things, especially ganglia. Ganglia is a new term in our class, because we know nerve, we know sensory, we know the motor endings. So ganglia is a group of neurons. So let's go and talk a little bit more about the sensory receptors. And as I say, these are a little bit more detailed. So it is just for your understanding. I don't think I will be picking too much in the exam, but for long term, for somebody who has done the anatomy class, I believe it is good to understand. At least, you can say, hey, I've heard of that, but I forgot. That might be better than, hey, I have never heard of it. So that's why, just try to relax and then just try to pick up as much as you can. There should be no pressure. So peripheral sensory receptors, these are the structures that pick up the stimuli and initiate the signal in the sensory axon. So which means, I believe you understand this. So if we touch someone, so that area being touched, there will be receptor which will pick up the touch sensation, which will pick up the touch stimuli, and then that touch stimuli, the picking up region is called sensory receptor, and that receptor will start to stimulate the electrical signal and will be taken away along the axon. And for example, like they could be like, just like free nerve endings, like just a nerve being like end in a multiple way, like widespread ending, or might be a properly arranged receptor, which is what we call the complete receptor cells. So yes, it's a little bit, annoying. Now I'm going to explain a little bit more the receptors. How can we classify receptors? The first way to classify receptor, or the first way to remember receptor, is according to where they are. According to where they are. Like if they are exposed to the environment, we will call it external receptors. For example, like those receptors in the skin. These skin receptors, they are always sensing the temperature change. They are always sensing the touch, pressure. So these receptors, in general, we call them exteroreceptors, for exposed to outside, external environment, exteroreceptors. If we have exteroreceptors, we will have interoreceptors, meaning like, the sensation coming from the gastrointestinal tract, urinary bladder, that's all the kidney. So exteroreceptors, interoreceptors, and proprioceptors. Proprioceptor is for proprioception, which exists in the muscles, tendon, joint. So let's say, if we close our eyes and if we cock up our wrists, without seeing, we know that our wrist is in this position. If we close our eyes and if we make a fist, we know that our hand is in clenched position without opening, seeing. So why do we know that? Why do we know that? Because we have the proprioceptors in the muscles and tendons and joints. And therefore, by stretching these muscle, tendon, joints, and the proprioceptors get stimulated, and they will tell us, hey, the hand is in spreading position, the hand is in clenched position. So these are the joint position sense which we pick up. These receptors are called proprioceptors. So it is easy to remember external, for example, like those receptors in the skin, internal, for example, those receptors in the internal viscera, or the joint position, which is called proprioceptor. So that's one way to remember how many types of receptors do we have. Another way to remember the different types of receptor is according to their function. Let's say according to the function, according to the stimuli they detect. So some receptor, they specialize in the temperature change, which we call thermoreceptors. Some receptor will specialize in the mechanical change, like being pushed, being pressed. So that is mechanical receptor. Some receptors will detect the chemical changes, like pH changes, hydrogen ion changes. For example, those chemoreceptors in our carotid sinus, aortic arch, you have seen. And these are the chemoreceptors. And the receptor inside our eye, the receptor inside our eye in the retina, just light shine in the eye, and that light stimulate the photoreceptor. So the light sensation receptor, which we call photoreceptors. And the other receptor is called nociceptors. Noci means as a nuisance, annoying sensation. It pick up the nuisance, annoying sensation, which is what we call the nociceptor. So yes, there are, in general, we can try to remember the different types of receptor in two ways. The first way is where they are. Are they present outside the body, which is in the skin? We call it exteroreceptors. And if it is present in the visceral organ, we will say internal receptors. And if they're present in the bone and joints and tendon, we will say the proprioceptors. Another way to remember is what sort of sensation they will pick up. If they pick up the temperature sensation, then they will say, we will call it thermoreceptor, mechanical sensation, mechanoreceptor, chemo, photo, and nociceptors. So now we have our skin. In our skin, of course, there will be exteroceptors. Yes, exteroceptors could be anything, like, as we know, temperature, touch, pain. So, if you look at this diagram, you can see the deep pressure receptor here. Look at the lamellar corpuscle. It is a deep pressure receptor. Again, like bulbous corpuscle, that is also another type of pressure receptor, which means if our skin is being pressed, these receptors will activate and stimulate the axons, and then that study along the peripheral nerve, go to the posterior root ganglion, go to the spinal cord, and then just tell us, go to the brain. So that's a lot of things we get triggered just because this receptor pick up the stimuli. And even if you look at the hair follicle has got hair follicle receptor. How amazing is it? That's the way we know, our hairs are having good skin or not. And where do they exist? Do they exist in the dermis? Of course, dermis is a very rich layer. We know that dermis is a rich layer, and everything, is present in the dermis. It's in the blood vessels, nerve. We don't have much in the epidermis. So yes, a little bit example, not important. If you have time, have a little look so that it could become more meaningful. If it is too much, you can drop it, the slide and the other slide. Yes, this slide might be a bit important because it is proprioceptors, especially those who are going to nursing, who are going to physical therapy, who are going for occupational therapy, or who are going to medical school. So you have a little bit of knowledge about proprioceptors. Proprioceptors, it is present in it is wrapping around the muscle spindles, around the tendons and ligaments. That's why if we stretch our wrist or our joints, the proprioceptors know, and then they will give us information. Hey, the wrist has been stretched too much or too far. Yes, like, have a look, not important, but I want you to remember muscle spindle. Look at the muscle, inside the muscle, skeletal muscle, we have a muscle spindle around the muscle spindle, or we have intrafusal fibers. Here, where is it? Intrafusal fibers are here. Intrafusal fibers are present, and these will detect the stretch and gives us the sense of proprioception so that we know where we are. And these fibers we also present in the tendons and organs. Too much about that. Let's forget about the receptors. In short, receptor can be divided. What is a receptor? Receptor is it's a structure which we pick up the stimuli. So this receptor can be divided into according to their location or according to their function or according to the stimuli they detect. And in the bone and joint, we have a specialized receptor which is called Marshall spindle. Marshall spindle. So these are receptors as well. So now we have detected, let's say if we touch heat, and that touch temperature from external environment, we come to the thermoreceptor in our skin. And this thermoreceptor, we start stimulating the axon and we send the information along the peripheral nerve. So this peripheral nerve, we pick up the sensation from the thermoreceptor, and then we'll be carrying up to the spinal cord and the brain. So this is the peripheral nerve, and I believe we have seen this diagram. And it starts with the axon. Axon will be covered with the myelin sheath, and that structure will be surrounded by the endoneurium. So multiple endoneurium covered axons, they are packed and surrounded by the perineurium. Perineurium packed multiple axons will be covered with the epineurium. So that is the structure of a peripheral nerve. That is the structure of a peripheral nerve. And then that nerve will pick up the stimulus from the sensory receptor, and then we go to the posterior root, and then we go into the spinal cord posterior root. So now we have a cranial nerves, cranial nerves, we have a 12 pairs of cranial nerve. So on the right, 12, on the left, 12 cranial nerves, mean the nerves coming out directly from the brain or the brain stem. So these are what we call cranial nerves. And I think it is good to remember these cranial nerves because they get involved with our life every day. So don't forget our cranial nerves. And now this diagram is trying to show you the cranial nerves and its function. Its function, of course, any nerve, we have to think in a way, because they are peripheral nervous system, so we have to think in a way that sensory function and motor function. If they have sensory function, they might be somatic sensory, or they might be visceral sensory, or they might be both. If it is motor, that cranial nerve could be purely somatic motor or purely visceral motor, or might be both. So a nerve could have only sensory function or only motor function, or might be both. So this is a good way to remember any nerve, any peripheral nerve. What is the function of this nerve? It could be, we have to think, it could be sensory function or it could be motor function, and then finally divide. So for example, like olfactory nerve. Olfactory nerve, it's only visceral sensory. Yeah, you remember that special visceral sensation comes from for the smell. The smell is visceral sensation, special visceral sensation. Olfactory nerve, which is the first cranial nerve, which do not have any somatic sensation. So if you go and touch the cranial nerve, it's nothing happen. The nerve will not get excited because its function is to accept the chemical stimuli for the smell. So therefore, touch sensation is not going to do anything for the olfactory nerve. And olfactory nerve is just for smell, and there is no motor function in the olfactory nerve. So olfactory nerve cannot move any structure. Its job is to pick up the visceral spatial sensation. That's all. That's for olfactory nerve. Olfactory and then optic. Optic nerve. Optic nerve. I hope you know optiction. Yeah. So optiction, optic nerve. So that is the number 2 nerve. It is for vision. Vision is somatic sensory, but it is spatial somatic sensory. If vision and hearing is spatial somatic. So optic nerve is to pick up the vision, which is the spatial somatic sensation, and optic nerve has got no motor function. No motor function, and optic nerve does not have visceral sensory. So that's why, sometimes I'm a little bit confused. Hey, optic nerve, it is inside the eye. The eye could be a visceral organ, but they don't take the vision sensation as the visceral. They take vision sensation as somatic. Somatic, spatial somatic sensation. For optic nerve is for vision only. Vision and vision only. Optic nerve, number 2 cranial nerve, cannot move the eye. Its job is to pick up the light photo sensation coming into the eye, come on the retina, pick up that stimuli, and optic nerve will take it to the occipital lobe, and then that we interpret as vision. So optic nerve is not to move the eye. Optic nerve is to see only. You can only see with optic nerve, and optic nerve cannot move any structure. So number 3 cranial nerve is oculomotor nerve. Oculo means eye, motor means movement. So hey, this 3rd cranial nerve is going to move our eyes. So 3rd cranial nerve, which is called oculomotor, oculo, eye, motor, movement. So therefore, oculomotor nerve do not have sensory function here. And oculomotor nerve has got somatic motor and also visceral motor. That's a little bit tricky. But what we need to remember at this stage is oculomotor nerve, which is the 3rd cranial nerve, is for motor. It will move our eye. So let's say whenever you look at something, like you are looking to the right, you are looking to the left, you are looking to up or down, try to remember oculomotor nerve. Because of our oculomotor nerve, we are moving our eyes. Trochlear nerve. Trochlear nerve is 4th cranial nerve. It is for the movement of the eye. And I'm going to skip the 5th, and I'm going to go to the 6th nerve, which is abductor nerve. Abductor nerve is also the motor movement of the eye. So the way I want you to remember is 3, 4, 6 is going to move our eyes. So now, if we want to move our eyes, we need the 3rd cranial nerve, we need the 4th cranial nerve, and we need the 6th cranial nerve. So if any problem with this, one of these 3 cranial nerve, then we will have problem with moving our eyes. So I hope you remember olfactory, optic, oculomotor, trochlear, and abducent. So 5th cranial nerve is trigeminal nerve. This is a little bit, like we get confused. 5th cranial nerve, number 5 cranial nerve, 5th cranial nerve. The name is called trigeminal. Trigeminal means 3, because this 5th cranial nerve divides into 3 main branches. And therefore, we call it trigeminal. So this fifth cranial nerve is such a big nerve for the face, for the head and neck region. It is very big nerve, fifth cranial nerve. Therefore, it can go and it can divide into 3 places. So if you just put your hand on the side of your finger like that, that is the fifth cranial nerve, which divides into 3 main branches, trigeminal, and then it will give all the sensation on our face. And therefore, fifth cranial nerve is really important. It gives the somatic sensation. So let's say if you touch your forehead, if you touch your cheek, or if you touch your mandible, if you touch to the mandible, that all these sensations will be taken by the fifth cranial nerve. All these sensations will be taken by the fifth cranial nerve and then taken to the brain. Of course, it's sensation. So finally, it will have to go to the thalamus. Thalamus is the big boy. Yeah, it will everything, all the sensation come into the body, into the brain. Before they go to the brain, they have to go to the thalamus. Therefore, thalamus is really important for the sensation. So but we are talking about the fifth cranial nerve, which is called trigeminal nerve. Why do we say trigeminal? Because it divides into 3 main branches on our face, to the forehead, to the maxilla, and to the mandible. Yeah, frontal, maxillary, and mandibular branches. Therefore, it is called the trigeminal nerve, and it is important. Let's say every morning, if you wash your face, you remember the fifth cranial nerve. As long as we know we are touching our face, then we have to say, hey, our fifth cranial nerve is nerve sensory portion of our fifth cranial nerve is one. Okay. And at the same time, this trigeminal nerve, we have somatic motor function. So fifth cranial nerve is pretty big and pretty big function. It contains both somatic sensory and somatic motor. It also have 6 cranial nerve. Yes, 6 cranial nerve is for the movement of the 6 cranial nerve is the movement only the motor. So 3, 4, 6, we move our eyes. So 3, 4, 6 cranial nerves, we move our eyes. And 6 and 7 cranial nerve. 7 cranial nerve, look at the 7 cranial nerve, which is the facial nerve. Facial nerve is not for sensation for the face. Facial nerve is movement of the facial muscle. So that is important. So face sensation will be picked up by the trigeminal nerve. And if you want to smile, if you want to close your eyes, if you want to close your mouth, then these movement of the facial muscles, that is supplied by the facial nerve. And of course, this facial nerve has got some special sensation, like it will pick up the taste sensation. So if we eat, the receptors on the tongue, the taste receptors, they will get stimulated, and these stimulus will go along the facial nerve sensory portion and will go to the brain, and we know that it's bitter or it's sweet or it's sour. So the facial nerve is for movement of the facial muscle. Don't go too deep, like just pick up the most salient point. And number 8 cranial nerve is what we call vestibulocochlear nerve. You know that you have 2 names in this: vestibulo, and cochlear nerve. Vestibulo and cochlear, it is for the hearing and equilibrium. Motor, it is a little bit debatable. They said some, don't worry about that. vestibulocochlear nerve, acranial nerve is for the hearing and equilibrium. So for us to stand upright in the air, we need proprioceptors from the bones and joints and muscles and tendon. At the same time, we need to have good ear. That's why, you know, those people who do not have good ear function, they are a little bit, they lost their equilibrium, so they cannot be upright. And of course, we also need the cerebellum. So that is the very much important in the posturing. So vestibulocochlear nerve, vestibular portion and cochlear portion, but they are important for hearing and equilibrium. And ninth cranial nerve is called glossopharyngeal nerve. Glosso and pharyngeal. Pharyngeal, I believe you remember the name pharynx, nasopharynx, laryngopharynx, nasopharynx, oropharynx, and laryngopharynx. That pharynx. So that way go and supply the the pharynx, and glosso mean tongue. So therefore, you know, look at this. This glossopharyngeal has all the function: somatic sensory, visceral sensory, somatic motor, visceral motor. So just try to go over overall view. So glossopharyngeal, if you want to swallow or if you want to make a gag, that sort of movement that will be carried by the glossopharyngeal nerve. The 10th cranial nerve is called vagus nerve. Vagus, its name is vagus, mean it is a long and windy and wandering around. So that is the definition of vagus. Vagus, long, windy. So that's vagus nerve is really long. It starts from the brain. It starts from the brainstem and then finally go all along the gastrointestinal tract down to the colon. So vagus is a long and windy, and look at its function. It has multiple functions here. 11th cranial nerve is called accessory, which is purely motor, and 12th cranial nerve is called hypoglossal nerve. Hypoglossal. Glossus means tongue. Hypoglossal nerve, we move the tongue. So if you stick out your tongue, if you move your tongue, then that job comes from the hypoglossal nerve. So this is a very rough idea about the cranial nerves. Of course, we might have to go through like a little bit more detail for each other, but I want you to have a little, you know, bird eye side of you. Like the olfactory nerve is for smell, optic nerve is for vision, oculomotor nerve, oculomotor, movement of the eye, trochlea for movement, abducent movement, trigeminal nerve, which has 5th cranial nerve, which has got 3 main branches for the sensation of the face, frontal, maxillary, and mandibular elevation. And the facial nerve is for movement of the facial muscles. Vestibulocochlear means like hearing and equilibrium. Glossopharyngeal nerve, we go to the pharynx, and glossus. Glossus means tongue and pharynx. Vagus nerve, it is wandering around, which is like a long stretch of vagus, we go to the heart, vagus, we go to the lungs, vagus, we go to the stomach, vagus, we go to the small intestine, vagus, we go to the part of the colon, large intestine. Accessory nerve, yes, it's purely motor, and hypoglossal nerve is for movement of the tongue. So that's the just very basic of the cranial nerves. And if we look at where they are, like, you know, when we talk about the central nervous system, we said starting from 3rd cranial nerve to the 12th cranial nerve, they are located in the brainstem. So 1st cranial nerve, olfactory nerve, from the nose, we go to the brain straight. Optic nerve, eye is here. From the eye, we go to the brain direct, occipital lobe. But the rest, starting from oculomotor, 3, 4, 5, 6, look at the 5th cranial nerve, very big, fifth cranial. That's why it can divide into three main portions: fifth cranial nerve, sixth cranial nerve, adjacent, 7, 8 cranial nerves, 9, 10, 9, 10, 11, 9, 10, 11, and 12 cranial nerve. They are all located in the brainstem. So if you hear a little bit before I let you go for a break, if you look at here, you have a small little nerve rootlets. That is what we call rootlets. Small little rootlets from the brainstem, medulla oblongata, and small little rootlets from the spinal cord. They were all merged together to form the accessory nerve. Look at that. Therefore, this accessory nerve is originately partly from the brainstem, partly from the very upper portion of the spinal cord, and they go out from the foramen magnum, go back into the brain, and finally come back out again. So that is a really awkward nerve, which is accessory nerve. So I hope it's like not too boring, because nervous system is a difficult part of the anatomy. And right, so where are we now? So I can take about another 5 minutes before I let you go for a break. So hey, these are we have talked about the cranial nerve, and this is the reflex, which we have seen this picture. We touch fire, the temperature thermoreceptor at the fingertip skin. We sense the heat, and that heat sensation will go along the axon of the sensory nerve, and we go along the spine, peripheral nerve, and go into the spinal cord root level. And then here we have the dorsal root ganglia, and finally we go into the spinal cord from the posterior root. And there might be interneural and the motor directly kick in, and motor fibers come out and pull the hand away from the fire. That is so much reflex. So the fire is hot, the hot sensation just reflects, our hands take it back. So we don't even think, it is so much reflex. That is what we call the spinal reflex. And in other words, we are taking away, therefore, withdrawal reflex. So taking away from the unpleasant stimuli or the heat or temperature, just straight away, just touch it back out without thinking anything. So from the sensory root, go in, motor root, come out straight away. There is no connection to the brain. It is just reflex. That's why we call withdrawal reflex. But at the same time, some of the fibers will go up along the spinal cord, and we go to the thalamus, and we go to the brain. And the brain we interpret as, hey, this fire is hot, so that we have a memory in our brain, and the fire is hot, and then start thinking like, hey, my fingertip is hot, I will put it under the cold water, I will not do this again. So all these different types of higher order thinking come in and process, and then we will not do this again, and we will put our finger underneath the running water. So that is the spinal reflex and the slower cortical pathway thinking. But what we need to look here is we have a neuron which is coming from the sensory receptor, going along the peripheral nerve, go into the dorsal root ganglia, synapse, and then come out and then go into the posterior horn of the spinal cord, and then through the interneuron, it acts on the motor neuron in the anterior horn, and then come back out and then go to the. So this is the spinal reflex, and some of the information will go up to the thalamus and go to the brain. So that is, we have like many spinal nerve coming out at different level of the spinal cord, like cervical spine region, we have 8 thoracic spine region, 12 thoracic vertebra, we have 12 thoracic, 12 pairs of thoracic spinal nerve. In the lumbar region, we have 5 lumbar vertebra, and we have 5 pairs of spinal nerve root and sacral, and this is the spinal cord. So now this is what we were talking about. So I will let you go for a break. I will let you go for a break. So let's say it is 5 minutes to 11. So we will meet 10 past 11. Yeah. So go for a break. I mean, just go away from the computer. I mean, it's too much. I appreciate that, but we have to go through, and then we have to revise. Only then we will remember. So it's a break time. We will meet 10 past 11. So now we know that we have 7 cervical vertebrae. So 7 vertebrae in the cervical region, 12 thoracic vertebrae, 5 lumbar vertebrae, 5 sacral vertebrae, which are fused, and 4 coccygeal vertebrae, which are also fused. And what about the spinal nerves? We know that from cervical region, we have 8 pairs of spinal nerves. It is 1 extra. In the thoracic region, we have 12 thoracic vertebrae, and we have 12 pairs of thoracic spinal nerves. In the lumbar region, we have 5, 1 to 5, lumbar 1 to 5, and sacral region, we have sacral 1 to 5, and coccygeal region, only 1 coccygeal nerve come out. So that this is the relationship between the numbers of the vertebral body and the numbers of the pairs of the spinal nerves coming out from the spinal cord. And as we know, in the cervical region, first cervical spinal nerve will come above the first, and finally, because of the 8th cranial nerve, 8th cervical nerve, it has to come below the level of the 7th cervical body. And since then, that's the C7 will come above the 7th vertebral body, and C8 it has to come below the 7th vertebral body. And then since then, like T1 below the vertebral body and the pedicle. So we talk about this. And we have the 31 pairs of spinal nerve, because we have 4 sacral vertebrae which is fused, and now for the nerve we only have 1 pair of the coccyx. Yeah, so I hope you understand this diagram. And if we do the cross section of the spinal cord, and this is the vertebral body, so which is anterior. This is the spinous process, which is posterior. And to make it simple, I have drawn a diagram, which is the vertebral body here. Anything coming out from the vertebral body is called pedicle. And then they will merge in the midline. These are called lamina. And this is the spinous process. And if it is something going out lateral, then we call it transverse process. So by doing so, right pedicle and left pedicle and left lamina and right lamina, they are going to make a ring, which is called the spinal canal. Inside the spinal canal, we have our spinal cord here. So this is a very rough diagram. Of course, this is a much more pretty diagram. Inside the spinal cord, we have the gray matter, which is H-shape, and white matter, which is outside the H. And from the anterior horn of the gray matter, the motor nerve will go out, and sensory nerve fibers will go into the posterior root. So combination of sensory coming in and motor going out, and that is what we call the spinal nerve. So this is the more like a photomicrograph of the spinal cord: anterior horn, anterior horn, posterior horn, posterior horn. Posterior horn is for the afferent sensory fiber, and anterior horn is for the efferent sensory fibers. And this is a little bit more detail, like, vertebral body, pedicle, lamina, spinous process, transverse process, and then spinal cord in this spinal canal. Spinal cord has called it the central canal, and posterior or dorsal sensory root going into the spinal cord, anterior or motor spinal nerve root coming out, and then they will merge together. This area is called spinal nerve. Hey, look at this. Look at, guys, here. Spinal nerve is dividing into two again, like one for the anterior ventral, another one for the posterior dorsal. So look at that. These two combine together to form the spinal nerve. So this region is called spinal nerve. And now they have to divide into anterior or ventral rami going, or posterior or dorsal rami. So that is the spinal nerve, which is just formed by the posterior root and anterior root combination. This region is called spinal nerve. And immediately, spinal nerve has to divide into ventral rami and dorsal rami. Look at that. They cannot live too long. So this dorsal rami will go to the back of the body, and ventral rami will go to the front or the every other part of the body. So look at that. Of course, a little bit more detailed diagram from the spinal cord, vertebral body, spinal cord. This spinal nerve will divide into ventral rami and dorsal rami. Dorsal rami is for the muscles in the back and for the skin. So muscles in the back and the skin will come from the dorsal rami, and these ventral rami, look at the ventral rami here, which is giving sensation or motor movement to every part of our torso here, other than the posterior deviation. So now I have created another problem for you, which is ventral rami and dorsal rami, which is the deviation from the spinal nerve. Yeah. So spinal nerve here, we divide into dorsal and ventral rami. Dorsal rami, we go to the back of the back spinal muscles of the back, and the skin for the back. And ventral rami, we go to the front, we go to the arm. So look at that, from the spinal cord, spinal little rootlets, we form the anterior ventral root, and here posterior dorsal root. Combination of these two is called spinal nerve. And finally, spinal nerve, and spinal nerve we have to divide into ventral rami and dorsal rami. Ventral rami and dorsal rami. So that is the nerve roots coming out from the spinal cord. And if you look at that, this spinal cord is covered with like a brain being covered, like dura mater, pia mater, and arachnoid mater, isn't it? The outermost layer is dura mater, middle layer is arachnoid mater, and innermost layer is pia mater. Pia mater as usual, very much attached to the spinal cord itself. So it will be very difficult to split these two, pia mater and the spinal cord. But arachnoid mater, in between the arachnoid mater and the pia mater, we have blood vessels, and we have CSF is in the subarachnoid space. Outermost layer is dura mater. So it is the same like our brain. This is this brain, same like our brain. And this, you can see now even better, like motor rootlets, little rootlets, we form the ventral root. Look at that ventral root, and the little dorsal root. We finally go into the dorsal rootlets. Combination of these two is called spinal nerve. Spinal nerve we have to divide into ventral rami and dorsal rami. And look at the blood vessels here, which is at the very much anterior region. So I hope this diagram is not too confusing. So dorsal root fan out into the small rootlets, ventral roots from the multiple rootlets combine, merge together to form the ventral root. Combination of dorsal root and ventral root is called spinal nerve. Spinal nerve we have to divide into ventral ramus and dorsal ramus. Yes, a little bit more detail, like, we have the ventral root, dorsal root, all the sensation. Look at that blue and green, somatic sensation, visceral sensation. We come from the dorsal root, and the visceral motor and somatic motor will leave from the ventral loop. So if you are a little bit more careful, these are the area. It is like very much detail about where they end. So this posterior horn is for sensory, and somatic sensory is the most posterior, and visceral sensory is more anterior to the somatic sensory. At the same time, somatic motor is very much anterior, and visceral motor is slightly more lateral. So these are the neurons located for the visceral motor nerve, and these are the neurons located for the somatic motor nerve. So look at the arrangement of the neurons location in the spinal cord. Yeah, so it is very much organized manner. Somatic sensory is posterior most, somatic motor is anterior most. Somatic visceral sensory and visceral motor are here and there. So that is the way, the neurons are located in the spinal cord. And at the same time, if you look at that, the ventral root and dorsal root here, ventral root and dorsal root, we form the spinal nerve here, spinal nerve is here. And finally, spinal nerve, we have to divide into ventral ramus and dorsal ramus. And at the same time, guys, on either side of the vertebral column, we have a long chain of nerve, which what we call sympathetic trunk and sympathetic ganglions. Ganglions mean collection of neurons here. So look at that. Now I have involved the sympathetic trunk, which is lying on either side of the vertebral body. So those nerve fibers coming in and out of the spinal cord, we also go and join the sympathetic trunk. Of course, sympathetic trunk is only in the thoracolumbar region. We do not have sympathetic trunk in the cervical region. We do not have sympathetic trunk in the sacral region. Sympathetic trunk is only for the thoracolumbar region, upper lumbar region. So now the picture is gradually become more and more detailed. So from here to there and then there. So look at the relationship. Spinal nerve is the formation of the dorsal root and ventral root. combination is called spinal nerve. Spinal nerve we divide into ventral rami and dorsal rami. And we also have the sympathetic chain with the ganglion. Ganglion means little beads, which is the collection of the neurons. And this ventral root will go and communicate with the sympathetic chain. So that is why our nervous system is quite complex. So look at that. We are looking at the same thing, same structure again, like from the ventral root, dorsal root. This is called the spinal nerve. Spinal nerve we divide into dorsal rami and ventral rami. And along on either side, we have the sympathetic chain. This will go to the sympathetic chain, come back from the sympathetic chain. And that's the way we try to communicate with every part of our body. And even for the communication with the ventral root and the sympathetic chain, we are very particular. Like we have the white remes communicantes. So this is the white color, which is connecting the ventral rami and the sympathetic chain, this is the gray color, which is the connection of these. So they are slightly different color, and therefore they might have different underlying structure. Yes, we need to understand. Look at that here. Look at that. Like from the dorsal root, ventral root, and this is called spinal nerve. Spinal nerve we divide into ventral rami, and dorsal rami. And ventral rami will go to the sympathetic ganglia, sympathetic chain ganglia, and come back here. Look at that, the way it is going. It goes here, from the white, it comes, and from the gray, it goes out. Look at that, you see? The white and gray. White is more lateral, gray is more medial. And look at that. The nerve fibers will come from the white, and then we leave with the gray. So look at that. Some of the nerve fibers will go to the ganglia and then just relay the information to another neuron and then leave, or some will go one or two level up or down, and some will not even go up or down. And then from here, they will go directly to the nearby nerve plexuses, nerve ganglion plexuses, and then we go to the intestine. So we will talk more about that when it comes to the autonomic nervous system. This is just a little bit of early pavement. So look at that. Now we can see the dorsal root. We can see the ventral root. Motor we come from the ventral root, and now you can see the lateral horn for the visceral motor zone. And coming from the visceral motor zone, leaving from the anterior root, become the spinal nerve, and go to the ventral rami, dorsal rami. And from here, it goes into the sympathetic chain, go and relay the information with another neuron. Look at that. This is the ganglia. Ganglia mean they are filled with multiple neurons. And second neuron will leave the ganglia and will go to the target organ. Therefore, the coming into the ganglion is white remes, and leaving changes the gray remes communicantes. So yes, some fibers will go, like we come out and then we go down, one level down or one level up. So look at that here. From here, visceral motor center, we come out anterior horn, we come along the white communicants, go up here. They do not relay the information with another neuron in their own level. They go one or two level up, and then we relay the information to the second order neuron and leave along the gray rami communicants, and then leave and go to the visceral organ. And look at that. Some of the fibers will not even relay any fiber in the sympathetic ganglia. they will go to the nearby, close to the target organ, like they have another ganglion, they will relay the information in the ganglion, and then they will go and supply the they will go and supply the target organ. So that's, many different arrangements which we will have to adapt with. So some way go and relay the information and synapse with another neuron, and then we leave. Some will go 1 or 2 level up or down. Some might not even synapse in the ganglion. They will go to the nearby ganglion close to the target organ, and then they will second order neuron will arise. Yes, it is a little bit complex, but we will go through easily. We will go step by step. Now look at that, a little bit of photomicrograph. You see, the central canal here, the H shape, which is gray matter. This is the posterior horn. This is the anterior horn. This is the spinal cord. Yeah. So look at that. What are we seeing? We have a disc here, intervertebral disc, and this is the spinal cord. Spinal nerve come out, and the disc is prolapsing and pressing on the spinal nerve root. That is what the condition called the disc prolapse, giving the irritation on the nerve. If you look at the spine, anatomical structure, like we have the vertebral body, vertebral bodies, and in between the vertebral bodies, we have disc, intervertebral disc. In between the vertebral body, we have intervertebral disc. The disc structure is made of central nucleus pulposus and outer annulus fibrosus. So nucleus pulposus has got a lot of water in a healthy disc. Therefore, if our back is good, mean our nucleus pulposus will contain lots of water. But with aging, or those people who smoke, the water will get dehydrated in the nucleus pulposus, and then this water, because of the loss of water, the disc will lose height, and there will be pressure on the nearby structures. And look at that, we have in the front of the vertebral body, we have anterior longitudinal ligament. In the back of the vertebral body, we have posterior longitudinal ligament. So this is anterior longitudinal ligament. This is posterior longitudinal ligament. That's the way for one vertebra are connected to each other. And even on the spinous processes, we have the multiple ligaments connecting each other. So I hope it is not too confusing, and try to remember the covering of the brain and spinal cord, which is Johnny Depp, DAP, durameter, arachnoid meter, and pyometer. And look at that. So, these are the intervertebral foramen where the spinal nerve roots come out. Yes, I have. You have seen these diagram already. So let me take you a little bit more, a few more minutes, like nerve plexuses. Nerve plexuses means, like, we saw the ventral rami and dorsal rami. Dorsal rami will go to the back of the skin body, and we supply the muscles of the back, and we supply the skin for the back. But what's happened to the ventral rami? So these ventral rami, all the ventral rami will combine together, all the ventral rami except thoracic 2 to thoracic 12. So spinal nerve of the thoracic 2 and thoracic 12, they will become the intercostal nerve. So other than T2 to T12, so cervical 1 to 8 and thoracic 1, lumbar 1 to 5, sacral 5, their ventral rami will merge together to form the nerve plexuses. So from the somatic motor region, the nerve fibers we come from the cervical, brachial, cervical plexus, brachial plexus, lumbar plexus, and sacral plexus. From visceral motor region, we will have autonomic nervous system nerve plexuses. So nerve plexuses mean all the ventral rami converge, they will merge together to form a plexus of the nerve, and they then diverge and they leave as the individual nerve. So which nerve are we talking about? 8 cervical ventral rami, T1 ventral rami, we will not involve T2 to T12, 5 lumbar ventral rami, and 5 sacral ventral rami. We merge together to form the nerve plexus. Then they will divide and they will leave the plexus as the individual nerve. So this is what we will be talking next week, and not next week, on Friday. So nerve plexuses from the cervical 5 to cervical 1 to cervical 5, all the ventral rami of the nerve from the cervical 1 to cervical 5, we merge together to form the cervical plexus. So cervical 5 to thoracic 1, we merge together to form the brachial plexuses. Lumbar ventral rami, we merge together to form the lumbar plexus. Some of the lumbar and some of the sacral anterior rami, ventral rami, we form together to form the sacral plexuses. Okay, so this is the sacral plexus, which we'll talk a little bit more in detail. So I'm not going to take you to sacral plexuses. And we have to talk about the brachial plexuses. So brachial plexus is the ventral rami of the cervical 5 to thoracic 1, thoracic 1 will rami, and they will merge together, they will form a complex of nerve, and then finally they will leave as an individual nerve, which will become like that. So I'm going to stop here, guys. We will continue with the peripheral nervous system on Friday. We'll continue with the peripheral nervous system on Friday.